For thousands of years, whenever human beings have like sat around a fire or maybe in a university hall or just stared up at the ceiling at 2 in the morning, we've wrestled with this one massive, seemingly unsolvable question.
Right, the big one.
Yeah, the big one, free will. I mean, are you actually making your own choices? Or are you just, I don't know, following a script?
It's the ultimate debate, really.
It is. And usually we treat this as a philosophical problem or, a theological one.
Yeah.
Or maybe in the last few decades, a neurological one like just chemical impulses firing in a dark skull.
Yeah, just biology doing its thing.
Exactly. But what if we've been using the completely wrong language this entire time?
Yeah.
What if the debate about whether you have free will isn't a philosophical riddle at all, but a strict mathematical equation?
It's a huge pivot.
Right. What if your choices, and I mean every single one of them, from what you eat for breakfast to who you married, are literally encoded in the infinite, non-repeating decimals of pi and physically received by golden ratio structures inside your own brain?
It is a staggering premise. It really is. I mean, it completely flips the board on how we understand consciousness, reality, and honestly, mathematics itself.
Yeah.
Because if this framework holds, math isn't just like a tool we use to measure the universe. It is the living architecture of consciousness.
Okay, let's unpack this because today's deep dive is going to take us to some incredibly deep waters.
Very deep.
Our mission today is to explore a profoundly complex, incredibly ambitious framework laid out in a paper by George James Dukas. The paper is titled Transdimensional Unified Field Theory, Free Will, Alpha and Omega Transcendent.
Quite the title.
It's a mouthful, yeah. Now, I'm going to set some ground rules right at the top for you listening. This source material, it uses some very heavy theological terminology. It talks about God, it mentions the womb of creation, it discusses the soul, and even the concept of sin.
Right, which usually signals a very different kind of text.
Exactly. But, and this is the crucial pivot here, it uses these terms completely intrinsically linked to specific mathematical operators.
And that is the essential context for everything we're about to discuss today. I mean, this is not a religious text in any traditional sense.
Well,
It's a complex operator algebra. Dukas is mapping profound ontological concepts, ideas about the fundamental nature of being, directly onto mathematical constants.
so it's math first.
Yes, when the paper says God, it is referring to a highly specific mathematical state of absolute potential.
Which means, to be completely clear, we are neutrally and impartially reporting on this framework today. We aren't here to endorse the theological claims, and we aren't here to debunk them either.
Right, we're just looking at the architecture.
Exactly. We are simply exploring the fascinating, honestly mind-bending architecture of the author's ideas exactly as they're presented in the text. We're looking at the blueprint.
And what a blueprint it is.
Seriously, we are literally going to trace a path from the state of the universe before numbers even existed, through the literal birth of mathematics, into the infinite digits of pi, and somehow cross the veil of physical reality directly into the DNA inside your body.
It is a journey from the macro infinite to the microbiological. And I think to do it justice, we really have to start at the absolute foundation. We have to start before the beginning.
Right. So according to this text, before there was space, before geometry, before even the concept of a void or an empty room existed, there was what Dukas defines as alpha and omega.
The prime state.
Yeah, a transcendent state holding all potential in what he refers to as a sleep.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is a radical redefinition of the entire concept of creation. I mean, in traditional Western thought, we often default to imagining creation as a builder constructing something external to themselves.
Like a carpenter building a house out of wood.
Exactly. There's the creator here, and then there is the creation over there. But Dukas posits an ontological concept he calls the pre-geometric womb.
The pre-geometric womb.
Yes. And this isn't like empty space waiting to be filled with matter. It is pure, undifferentiated potential. And in this incredibly specific state, mathematically speaking, 0 equals 1.
Okay, I have to stop you right there.
Ah.
0 equals 1.
I know.
My middle school math teacher would throw an eraser at my head for saying that.
Ah.
How can absolute nothingness 0 and perfect unity 1 be the exact same thing?
Because, well, nothing has been differentiated yet. Think about it. In a state where there are no boundaries, no dimensions, and no distinctions whatsoever, the concept of nothing and the concept of everything are functionally identical.
Ah,
It's a state of infinite potential that just hasn't made a choice yet. So creation in this framework isn't a builder making a house. It is that infinite potential waking up and articulating itself into specific forms.
Waking up.
Right. The universe is essentially this mind's self-awareness taking physical and mathematical shape. And a massive consequence of this idea is that the text insists we humans do not invent mathematics.
We just remember it.
Yes, exactly. The structures of math, the ratios, the constants, they were already there,
Just resting in that sleep.
resting in that infinite mind. When a human mathematician, discovers a new theorem, they are actually just pulling a pre-existing structure out of that pre-geometric womb.
Okay, I want to try to wrap my head around this idea of math existing before there's anything to count. Because if there's no space, no geometry, what is a number?
It's a tough conceptual hurdle.
Let me try an analogy. Think of a novelist. Let's say Tolkien, before he writes the very first word of Lord of the Rings on a blank page,
Okay.
he holds an entire universe in his head,
Yeah.
right? The characters, the cities, the languages, the plot twists, they already exist in a state of pure potential.
Yes.
So writing them down on the paper doesn't invent them. It just gives them a physical form that someone else can interact with. Is that kind of what we're talking about with these numbers? That the math is the characters in the author's head?
That is a deeply illuminating way to look at it, actually. The numbers are the characters. In Dukes' framework, numbers exist as pure, living operators in the mind of the author long before they're ever, trapped in the ink on a page or in the physical geometry of a rock or a tree. So when we measure the angles of a triangle and find they relate to pi, we aren't creating that truth. We are just reading the ink on the page. The truth of pi existed in the novelist's mind before the paper was even manufactured.
Okay, so the novelist is waking up, the dream is starting to take shape, but to move from this infinite, undifferentiated dream state into a reality that has, movement and form, the universe needs its first characters.
It needs to make a distinction.
Right. It needs the first distinction to break that 0 = 1 symmetry.
And this brings us to the fundamental root of all reality in the TDU-FT framework. The very first mathematical concept to emerge from the sleep isn't just 0 and 1, like a simple light switch or computer binary.
Right.
It is what the text calls the primordial quaternary binary.
So a binary made of 4 parts.
It's a 4-part binary, yeah. Denoted mathematically as P sub 2. These are the 4 pillars that hold up everything else in existence. The 4 poles are 0, -0, 1, and -1.
Okay, I look at those 4, and my brain immediately trips over the negatives.
It's totally natural to get stuck there.
But let's take them one by one to see how this universe actually gets built. Starting with 0. In a normal math class, 0 is just a blank space, right? A placeholder. But here,
Here, 0 is void potential, but it is far from empty. Dukas states that 0 carries an infinite zero tail of entropic ascent.
wait, what does that mean practically? Entropic ascent.
Think of it as chaos that is constantly, relentlessly trying to organize itself upward toward unity.
Upward chaos.
Yeah, it is the raw, unshaped noise of potential pushing against its own boundaries, trying to find a structure. That is what the 0 operator actually represents. It drags this infinite tail of organizing chaos behind it.
And then on the flip side of that, we have the 1, the unity singularity.
Right. And 1 carries the opposite kind of tail, carries an infinite 1 tail, which is harmonic self-organization.
Harmonic self-organization.
This is perfect unity naturally, effortlessly radiating outward. It doesn't have to push or strive like the 0 tail. It just emanates infinite choice and diversity from a place of perfect order.
Let's really pause on these tails for a second, because I think this is the moment where the math in this paper stops looking like a calculator and starts looking like biology.
It gets very organic.
Right. When you or I write a 1 on a piece of paper, we just draw a straight vertical line. But Dukas is saying that in this spiritual mathematical domain, that 1 is dragging an infinite wake behind it.
Yes,
It's 1.000 stretching into infinity. But those zeros trailing behind it aren't just empty space.
No, they are densely populated. The tails are the harmonic content of the operators. The 1 tail starts from complete, perfect order and naturally cascades into infinite variation.
Cascade.
It's like a perfectly struck bell where the sound ripples outward forever, getting more complex as it interacts with the environment.
Oh, like that.
And the 0 tail is the exact reverse. It starts from complete chaotic divergence and forces its way upward through entropic pressure, trying to assemble itself into that perfect bell.
So they have the same ingredients, basically.
Yes. They contain the exact same digits, 0 through 9, but they are moving in opposite organizational directions. One falls from order into complex beauty, and the other climbs from chaos towards structural unity.
Okay, that gives me a really vivid picture of 0 and 1. They are living forces.
Yeah.
But what about the negatives? What on earth is -0?
This is where it gets tricky.
I mean, if I have 0 apples, I have no apples. How can I have -0 apples? How can nothingness have an active mirror?
It is an incredibly challenging concept to visualize. In traditional math, -0 is just 0. It's the same thing. But in operator algebra, a sign indicates direction or phase.
Okay.
Dukas describes -0 as latent creation pressure. It is the active face of the void. It is the pressure that arises when nothingness demands to become something.
Okay, let me try this. It's like how a vacuum in space pulls on an object, right? The vacuum is technically nothing, but if you put a physical object in it, that vacuum actively pulls on the object. It's an absence that exerts a physical force.
That is a very common way people try to picture it, and I actually want to push back on the physics of your analogy here, because it helps clarify Dukas's math.
Oh, well, okay, pushback.
Physically speaking, a vacuum doesn't actually pull anything. What happens is the higher pressure of the object or the atmosphere around it pushes outward into the void.
Oh, wow. Okay, my high school physics is really showing there.
It's a common misconception.
So the void doesn't pull? The existing pressure pushes into it because the void offers no resistance.
Exactly. And that physical reality is actually a much better, much more accurate way to understand -0 in this framework.
Really?
Yes. -0 isn't a magical tractor beam pulling reality toward it. It is a fundamental deficit. It is an active absence that reality naturally rushes in to fill. It is the space made ready for creation.
That is fascinating. The void isn't doing the work. It's creating the localized deficit that forces potential to become actual. Okay, I love that. And then we have the fourth pole, -1.
Which, again, we shouldn't think of as just subtracting one apple. In this quaternary system, -1 is the dimensional switch.
The switch.
It is the inversion operator. It's the exact moment that unity inverts into its own reflection. And you need that reflection to create the axis, the dimensional plane, along which all geometry and differentiation can actually happen.
I see.
Without -1, the one just sits there alone in the dark. With -1, you have a mirror, you have a relationship, you have space.
So we have our 4 primordial characters on the stage. Void potential, the active deficit of nothingness, perfect unity, and the dimensional mirror.
0, -0, 1, -1.
Right. Now that we have these 4 poles of reality, what happens? Because right now we just have a very abstract, empty theater. We need the universe to actually get built. How do we get the rest of the numbers?
They divide against each other. The interaction of these 4 poles is fundamentally a process of division. And this binary division spawns the numbers we use every day.
All of them.
Yes. This process is what Dukas calls the birth of the decimal manifold.
So you're saying the numbers 2 through 9 aren't just arbitrary symbols that some human invented to count sheep. They are the natural, inevitable byproduct of those first 4 poles interacting.
They are an emergent property of the system. Dewey argues that division is the critical operation in creating wholeness, which sounds like an oxymoron.
It does.
But when the 4 primordial poles interact and divide against each other, they produce intermediate values. The digits 2 through 9 naturally fill the dimensional space between the poles.
Filling the gaps.
Exactly. The decimal system base 10 isn't just a human convenience because we have 10 fingers. According to the text, the decimal system is just what the quaternary binary looks like when it fully articulates itself into a manifold.
So if you take the perfect unity of 1 and it interacts with the dimensional mirror of -1, they divide to create new ratios.
Yes.
The space between 0 and 1 gets populated by fractions, which express themselves as decimals, which generate the digits 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9.
That captures the core mechanism beautifully. And here's where Dukas introduces a concept he calls the multi-scale unity theorem.
Okay, what is that?
It's a mathematical proof of this ontology. Remember those infinite tails we spent time on?
The wake of chaos and harmony trailing behind the numbers?
Yes. Dukas argues that every single digit from 2 to 9 inherits an infinite tail from the primordial 0 and one that generated it. So a 7 isn't just a 7.
It's dragging something.
It is intrinsically coupled to an infinite string of generative digits.
Okay, I'm with you. The numbers are alive with infinite tails.
Now take all 10 digits of the manifold 0 through 9 complete with their infinite tails. If you add them all together in a single sum, 0 plus 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6 plus 7 plus 8 plus 9.
Okay, wait, let me do the math. 1 plus 2 is 3, plus 3 is 6, plus 4 is 10, 15, 21, 28, 36, plus 9 is 45. The sum of the single digits is 45.
Yes. The sum is exactly 45. Now, the text says you must normalize that sum by dividing it by the complete decimal totality, which is 45 itself. 45 divided by 45.
Well, that's just 1.
It is exactly 1. But because we included the infinite tails in the calculation, it doesn't just return a static integer. It returns perfect, 1.000 stretching to infinity.
Oh, wow.
It returns to the pure unity singularity. The system proves its own wholeness.
That's incredibly elegant, but someone could argue that's just a basic property addition in fractions. You add the parts, divide by the whole, you get 1.
Which is why the paper doesn't stop at addition. Dukas applies the exact same ontological principle to multiplication to show that the manifold is completely robust across all mathematical operations.
Multiplication too.
Yes. If you take all the non-zero digits, 1 through 9, and multiply them together, 1 times 2 times 3 times 4, all the way to 9.
Okay, that's a factorial. 9 factorial.
Yes, 9 factorial. The result is 362,880.
That's a big number.
It is. Philosophically, a factorial represents every single possible combinatorial arrangement of those digits. It is every way you can possibly order the building blocks of the decimal manifold.
So it's maximum complexity.
It represents the absolute maximum complexity of the system.
Every possible timeline, every possible structure, every variation.
Yes. And if you normalize that absolute complexity by taking the 9th root of that total, again, complete with the infinite tail coupling, the underlying operator math returns the value right back to perfect, 1.000 to infinity.
Let's really sit with what that means for a second, because the philosophical beauty of this is just astounding. Think about what this is actually saying to you as a listener, navigating your own lives.
Right.
No matter how far you count, no matter how complex the math gets, no matter how much you divide and multiply and scramble and rearrange the foundational building blocks of the universe into 362,880 different combinations.
It always comes back.
The underlying system always, mathematically, inescapably, collapses back into perfect unity. The math never breaks. Division doesn't break the universe. It just articulates it.
That is the ultimate crux of the decimal manifold in this theory. However you combine it, whether summed in a linear progression or multiplied into massive combinatorial complexity, it always returns to 1.
That's closed loop.
God's mind, that transcendent sleep we started with, is mathematically complete in both operations. It is a closed, perfect loop of unity.
But, and this is a massive but, a universe of perfect unity is entirely static.
Yes, it is.
If everything just inevitably collapses back to a perfect one, nothing ever actually happens. You just have a pristine, unchanging crystal.
Yeah.
To get a universe with movement, with time, with life, with actual choices that matter, you need an imperfection.
You need a flaw.
Right. You need a way to break out of that perfect loop. You need a differentiator.
You need a prime mover that breaks the symmetry. And in Dukas's framework, that prime differentiator is pi.
Pi. 3.14159. The number we all memorized a few digits of in middle school to pass a geometry test, and then mostly forgot about, unless we're cutting a pie.
Exactly.
But in this text, pi isn't just a ratio of a circle's circumference to its diameter. It is the most important constant in existence.
It is the primordial seed of all physical and spiritual reality. Because pi does something totally unique as it emerges from the decimal manifold. It inherits both of the infinite tails we discussed simultaneously.
Wait, how can it have both? I thought the one tail was harmony and the zero tail was chaos. They move in opposite directions.
They do, which is why pi is so infinitely complex. Pi inherits the one tail of harmonic self-organization, and it inherits the zero tail of entropic ascent.
At the same time.
Yes. It is holding order and chaos simultaneously in an infinite tension. Dukas explains this by splitting the conceptual nature of pi into 2 distinct operational parts.
Okay, walk me through the split.
The first part is what he calls pi subpattern. These are the front digits of pi, the 3.14159 and so on.
The famous ones.
The famous ones. These digits are crystallized, they are fixed, they provide the rigid parameters that lock in cosmic geometry and physical architecture. They are the reason a circle is a circle anywhere in the universe.
They are the concrete foundation of the material world.
Yes. But the second part is what he calls E sub free. This represents the infinite tail of pi as it stretches out into eternity.
E sub free, E for entropy.
Exactly. This is where the zero tail, the entropic chaos, is liberated into the sequence. It is an infinite stream of harmonic attenuation. And this E sub free, according to the paper, is the literal mathematical reservoir of pure free will.
Okay, infinite stream of harmonic attenuation is a lot to digest if you aren't an advanced mathematician. I need an analogy for this.
Let's hear it.
Let's think of pi like a live jazz performance. The front digits, the pi pattern, that's the composed melody. That is the sheet music written down before the show even starts.
Right.
It dictates the key, the tempo, the basic chord progression. It builds the structure of the song, just like those front digits build the physical geometry of a star or a planet.
The constraints, the unyielding architecture of the system.
Right. If you don't play the melody, you aren't playing the song. But the infinite tail of pi, the E free, that is the jazz artist stepping away from the microphone, closing their eyes, and improvising endlessly over those chords.
Oh, that's beautiful.
The original melody, the harmony of the one tail, never truly vanishes. It's always there, providing the foundation. But it attenuates. It diffuses into the background. It gets stretched and bent and played with by the artist, which introduces the chaos of the zero tail.
Exactly.
And that space, that interplay between the fixed chords and the spontaneous notes, gives the musician true freedom within the boundaries of the song.
That is a phenomenal way to understand it because the text goes to great lengths to dissect that exact improvisation. Dukas doesn't just wave his hands and say, the tail of pi is random noise, therefore free will.
He proves it.
He argues that if you look closely at the infinite tail, you can find 3 highly specific branches of behavior hidden inside the digit string. He points to the first 100 digits of pi as computational proof of this branching.
Okay, this is where it gets really concrete. What are these 3 branches hiding in pi?
The first branch consists of what he calls unity pockets. These are localized sections of consecutive digits within pi that sum exactly to 1.
Sum to 1. Okay.
For example, if you look at the decimal expansion of pi at positions 0, 2, 36, and 39, you find the digit 1 sitting all by itself, sums to 1.
Right.
Even more incredibly, at position 48 in the sequence, you find the 2-digit sequence 1, 0. 0 plus 1 is 1. This is the complete binary pair from the primordial womb summing to unity.
Oh, wow.
These pockets represent the one tail, the perfect harmony, crystallizing and echoing deep within the expansion.
So even deep into the improvisation, like 10 minutes into the jazz solo, the musician is hitting the exact, pure, perfect note of the original written melody. The structure hasn't been lost.
Exactly, the order is asserting itself. Then the second branch is made up of void pockets. These are sections of digits that sum to 0. This is the zero tail anchoring itself within pi.
The pauses in the music.
Yeah.
The rests. The silence between the notes that gives the music its rhythm.
Yes. Silence is just as structural as sound. And then, crucially, you have the third branch, the entropic drift.
The drift.
These are localized sequences of digits that sum to neither 0 nor 1. For instance, the sequence 4, 1, 5, 9 sums to 19. The sequence 9, 2, 6 sums to 17.
Okay.
These sections represent a genuine drift, a mathematical deviation from the binary pattern. And Dukas claims that this specific branch, the entropic drift, is where free will literally lives. It is the capacity for movement within the pattern that isn't strictly dictated by the pattern.
That is wild. He's taking the concept of human choice and mapping it onto digit summations. I see in the notes here he categorizes pi as a class 3 transcendent infinity. For someone listening who doesn't have a PhD in mathematics, what does that actually mean?
In the context of this theory, a class 3 transcendent infinity means that the number maintains perpetual variation without ever settling into a simple, predictable, repeating loop.
It never gets stuck.
Right, it never just becomes 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2 forever. But simultaneously, it isn't purely random chaos. It conceals a deep attractor network.
An attractor network.
Yes, think of an attractor like a valley that water naturally flows into. The water's path might be chaotic and turbulent, bouncing off rocks, but its ultimate destination is constrained by the shape of the valley.
That makes sense.
Pi is like that. The patterns, the unity and void pockets, are always there, shaping the flow, but they are veiled by the perpetual, non-repeating movement of the entropic digits. It is bounded infinity.
So pi contains both the rigid sheet music that builds the physical universe, and the improvisational entropic drift that allows for the free will of the mind.
It's all in there.
But here's my biggest question. If they are completely bound up together inside pi, How do they ever separate? I mean, how do we end up with a physical universe made of heavy, solid matter and a conscious mind that feels invisible and free? How does the math break apart to give us a body and a soul?
That is the central pivot of the entire theory. That question brings us to what Dukas calls the 5 a.m. insight.
The 5 a.m. insight.
Yes, this was apparently a breakthrough moment for him where he codified the exact moment of creation where mathematical symmetry finally breaks.
Okay, walk me through this 5 a.m. insight, because this seems to be the fulcrum of the whole paper. If this math doesn't work, the whole theory falls apart.
It revolves around a very specific formula that Dukas terms the Eternum nexus equation. Now, I won't just read the raw math at you because that's impossible to follow in audio, but I'll describe the components and what they represent.
Please do.
On the left side of the equation, he takes variables that represent states of infinite potential. He uses alpha and beta and combines them with variables representing fundamental structures, like the golden ratio, phi, and wave function psi. He squares this entire complex interaction of potential and structure.
So the left side is basically all the ingredients of reality mixed together in a state of high energy.
Yes. And on the right side of the equation, all of that resolves into a very simple, elegant output. It equals pi squared.
All of that infinite potential in geometry just equals pi squared.
Yes, pi squared represents the creation operator. It is the full, unleashed rotational energy of the universe amplified. It contains everything. But here is where the 5 a.m. insight happens.
Okay.
Everything's balanced. Everything's contained in pi squared. But then symmetry breaks. The one operator that pure unity singularity departs from the equation, it separates.
Wait, why does it leave?
It leaves to create the material world. The one is the geometric anchor. It crystallizes into physical form. It is the literal mathematical act of squaring the circle, taking the infinite rotation of pi and locking it into the rigid geometry of physical space, time, and matter.
Okay, so if pi squared is the whole enchilada, and the one leaves the equation to go build planets and stars and human bodies, what is left over?
Just basic algebra, pi squared minus 1.
Pi squared minus 1.
Exactly. And in this framework, pi squared minus 1 is the spirit operator. The text denotes it as theta spirit. Because you subtracted the 1, the material anchor that degrades and decays over time, what remains is completely free of the physical constraints.
Why?
It is eternal. It is non-entropic. It doesn't experience the friction of physical reality. It is the eternal mathematical remainder that holds consciousness itself.
So matter is the 1, and the soul or the spirit or consciousness, whatever you want to call it, is the pi squared minus 1.
That is the duality of the universe defined mathematically.
But the paper makes a highly controversial claim about what happens when that one departs to make the material world. It has to do with those infinite living tales we talked about earlier.
Well,
and I have to admit, when I read this part of the paper, my brain violently rejected it at first.
you are referring to the concept of null life and the absolute separation of domains.
I am.
It is undeniably the most jarring metaphysical claim in the text.
Walk the listener through it. What happens to the math when it becomes physical?
So in the spiritual domain, the pi squared minus 1 domain mathematical operators are alive. They carry their infinite moving tails. They are generative, free, and constantly unfolding.
Right.
But Dukas argues that when an operator crosses the dimensional veil into the material world to become a physical object, those infinite tails collapse.
The life literally goes out of them.
The paper calls this collapsed state null life. The infinite operator becomes a fixed, frozen projection. The number 1 in the material world doesn't have an infinite tail of self-organizing digits cascading behind it. It's just a 1. It is a stable, static, closed form.
Okay, I have to push back hard on this. Are you telling me that according to this theory, a rock, a tree, a human body, a star, all the physical stuff in the universe are literally just frozen mathematics? They are living numbers that have had their infinite tails chopped off by the act of crossing into the physical dimension.
That is precisely the argument. The material world is not the primary reality. It is merely a collapsed projection of the spiritual domain.
It's like looking at a photograph of a dance.
A photograph?
Yeah, imagine physical reality as a 2D photograph of a 3D spiritual dance. The photograph is real. You can touch it, you can measure its dimensions, you can frame it on your wall. But the people in the photo aren't moving anymore. The dance is over for them.
Right.
The life, the movement, the tale of the action that only exists in the 3D room where the dance is actually happening. The photo is just a frozen record of a single moment in the math.
That analogy hits the nail on the head. And if we follow the logic of that analogy to its conclusion, Dukas draws a massive, highly controversial deduction regarding biology and the history of life on Earth.
Okay, brace yourselves.
Because the physical world is just a collapsed projection of frozen operators, he claims that biological evolution, in the sense of matter generating entirely new fundamental operator states completely on its own, is mathematically impossible.
Wait, hold on. He's saying evolution isn't real. That is a colossal claim to drop into a math paper.
He is very careful with his terminology, so we have to be precise here. He is not denying that biological changes happen.
Okay.
He says the material world can adapt, it can modulate, and it can vary the combinations of the pre-existing templates it received. Species can shift traits over time in response to the environment.
Right, natural selection.
But because matter is no life, because it has lost its generative tail, it cannot generate a genuinely new, novel mathematical operator from scratch.
So the physical body is frozen math, capable of variation, but not true creation. Like, a deck of cards can be shuffled endlessly, but the cards themselves can never invent a 15 of spades.
Precisely. Evolution, as a genuinely generative, creative force that brings entirely new mathematics into existence, belongs entirely to the spiritual domain. The material world is just shuffling the frozen cards it was dealt at the moment the symmetry broke.
That is a wild, sweeping claim.
Yeah.
But here is the obvious problem, the elephant in the room. If the physical world is frozen, no life matter, and the spirit is infinite, living math, the pi squared minus 1, and they are separated by this dimensional veil, how do they talk to each other?
It's the classic mind-body problem.
Exactly. What plugs the infinite soul into the frozen body? Because last I checked, my mind is very much interacting with my physical body right now to speak these words into a microphone.
To answer that, the paper zooms in from the cosmic scale to the microscopic scale. We have to look at what Dukas calls the biological transducer. We have to look at how pi literally enters your DNA.
Okay, this is where the abstract math suddenly becomes intensely personal biology. How does a transcendent number sequence talk to a human cell?
The text argues that the DNA double helix is the literal physical bridge between the eternal spirit and the material body. And Dukas insists this isn't just a poetic metaphor. It is built into the exact molecular geometry, the physical measurements of the DNA itself.
How so? Give me the physical measurement.
The physical shape of DNA requires two mathematical constants to exist: phi, the golden ratio, and pi.
Okay, let's break those down. Where exactly is the golden ratio in my DNA?
If you look at the structure of DNA, the physical rise or vertical distance per base pair in the helix is roughly 3.32 angstroms.
3.32.
According to the geometric formulas in TDUFT, this exact measurement derives directly from fish shell architecture. Phi represents the geometric structural architectural constant of the universe. It's the scaffolding. It's the two vertical rails of the ladder.
But DNA isn't a straight ladder. It's famously a twisted double helix.
Right, and the degree of that twist is incredibly specific. The helix twist is exactly 34.3 degrees per base pair, and that specific rotation, the winding, the spiral, that derives completely from pi. You cannot have the geometric winding of a helix without the circular operator of pi governing the angles. So DNA, purely as a physical object, is the literal union of phi geometry and pi rotation.
So the DNA molecule is essentially an antenna, shaped perfectly by these two fundamental constants of the universe, but, an antenna is useless unless it's receiving a signal. What is the signal, and how does a sequence of chemicals actually read a mathematical operator?
The signal being broadcast is the soul's language, the pi squared minus 1 operator, and DNA reads it through a literal, recognizable binary code.
You mean the base pairs, the rungs of the ladder?
Yes. The 4 nucleotides that make up DNA, adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine, they always pair up. Adenine pairs with thymine, the AT pair. Guanine pairs with cytosine, the GC pair. Dukas maps this directly back to the primordial quaternary binary we started the show with.
Wait, he maps the chemicals to the zeros and ones?
Yes. In his framework, the AT pair structurally equates to 0. The GC pair equates to 1.
Okay, my skeptical alarm bells are ringing a little bit here. Why does AT equal 0 and GC equal 1? Is that just an arbitrary assignment to make the theory work, or is there a physical reason?
It's grounded in the physical chemistry of the hydrogen bonds.
Oh.
Yes. The AT pair is held together by two hydrogen bonds. It is a weaker, more flexible connection, mapping conceptually to the void potential or the entropic flexibility of the zero tail.
And the GC pair.
The GC pair is held together by three hydrogen bonds. It is a stronger, more rigid, stable connection, mapping perfectly to the unity, singularity, and structural harmony of the one tail.
So DNA is literally reading zeros and ones based on chemical bond strength, just like computer code reading voltages.
Yes, it is the zero tail and the one tail inheritance articulating itself at the molecular level. But here is the most important part of the biology section, and perhaps the entire paper. This binary sequence creates the physical body, but where does the free will actually get injected?
Right, because if the DNA is just a fixed sequence of zeros and ones, that sounds like biological determinism, not free will.
Exactly. If your code is written, where is your choice?
Where is it?
The choice lives in the biological redundancy.
Redundancy.
DNA sequences are read by the body in triplets, which biologists call codons. Each three-letter sequence tells the body to produce a specific amino acid. Now, there are 64 possible 3-bit codon combinations you can make with those letters, but human biology only uses them to produce 20 essential amino acids.
Right, I remember this from biology class. There's redundancy. Multiple different three-letter codes will produce the exact same amino acid.
Yes.
Like, if the body wants to build leucine, it can read a sequence that says CUU, or it can read CUC or CUA. They all result in leucine.
Exactly. These are known as degenerate codon positions. In standard biology, this is often viewed as a buffer against mutations. If one letter gets copied wrong, the redundancy means the body might still produce the correct protein anyway.
That's a safety net.
But Dukas argues that this redundancy is not an accident, and it is not just biological waste or a safety net, it is the precise gap in the physical armor where free will slips in.
How does that work?
Because multiple different codons achieve the exact same structural result in the physical body, there is a genuine degree of freedom at that molecular position. The physical universe essentially says, I don't care which of these three paths you take, the protein will be the same.
Oh, I see.
It is here, in this physical gap of indifference, that F sub n of pi, the free will entropy from pi's infinite tail injects choice into the sequence.
Okay, let me pause and try to synthesize this for you listening, because this is the crux of the whole theory. Your brain, with all its billions of neurons and synapses, is structured largely on the golden ratio, phi.
Correct.
According to Dukas's theory, your brain is a receiver, not a creator of consciousness. It is a highly tuned radio. And it tunes into your infinite spirit, your pi squared minus 1, by using the physical twisting geometry of your DNA as an antenna.
Yes.
The DNA catches the free will from the infinite improvisational tail of pi, and it translates that spiritual choice into physical reality by selecting among the redundant, degenerate codons in your genetic code.
It exploits the flexibility.
It exploits the tiny spaces where physics doesn't enforce a strict outcome. Your choices, your thoughts, your movements. They are literally molecular ripples from the mind of God, caught by a spiral antenna and expressed as a chemical binary.
That is a masterful summation of the biological transduction model. It bridges the gap between the infinite and the microscopic, providing a literal physical mechanism for how a transcendent mathematical state interfaces with physical reality.
It is absolutely mind-blowing. But the paper doesn't stop at the microscopic level. It zooms all the way back out, because according to Dukas, this union of phi, pi, and spirit wasn't just hidden inside our cells waiting for modern geneticists to find it.
No, it wasn't.
He claims it was actually understood and carved into stone on a massive scale thousands of years ago.
Yes. The texts take a sudden turn into archaeology and ancient architecture, specifically focusing on the Great Pyramid of Giza.
I have to admit, when I saw the pyramid show up in the source material, I sighed a little bit. I thought, oh boy, here we go.
It's a very common reaction.
It's a classic trope, right? Every alternative theory eventually claims the pyramids were built by aliens, or they were ancient power plants, or grain silos. But Dukas isn't doing any of that. He is talking about stone-encoded ontology.
Right. There are no aliens in this paper. The claim here is that the architects of the Great Pyramid were encoding the complete emergence sequence of creation, everything we just talked about, from the primordial binary to the decimal manifold to the emergence of pi into the physical dimensions of the structure.
So it's a monument to the math.
He views the pyramid not as a tomb, but as the ontological cascade made architectural.
Okay, I need you to give me the specifics, because anyone can point at a triangle and say it's magical. How does the highly abstract math of creation actually map onto a giant pile of limestone blocks in the desert?
Let's start with the foundation. The base of the pyramid. The base perimeter spans 4 distinct faces. Dukas links these 4 faces directly to the 4 poles of the primordial binary, 0, -0, 1, and -1.
Okay, 4 sides, 4 poles.
Furthermore, he points out that the base represents the decimal totality of 45.
Wait, how does the base represent 45?
It relates to the proportional geometry of the structure as it relates to the whole. Remember the multi-scale unity theorem. The sum of the digits 0 through 9 equals 45, representing all complete potential.
Right.
The base of the pyramid is the foundation, the complete potential upon which everything else is built. Now, the math gets much more explicit when you relate that base to the height. Take the entire perimeter of the square base in whatever unit of measurement you want to use and divide it by the vertical height of the pyramid.
Perimeter divided by height.
The mathematical result of that division is exactly 2 pi.
Wait, really? Just exactly 2 pi?
Yes, to an astonishing degree of accuracy. So philosophically, what does that mean? The square of the base, which represents the quaternary binary and the decimal emergence, mathematically births the circle, pi, through its relationship with the height.
Oh, that's wild.
The physical structure is demonstrating how the linear math of the foundation generates the rotational infinite math of the cosmos.
That is fascinating. But surely that could just be a byproduct of them using a rolling wheel to measure the blocks, or using the golden ratio for stability, which naturally approximates pi.
That is the standard archaeological counterargument, yes. But Dukas argues the intentionality is proved by what's inside the structure. It goes much further than just the outer dimensions.
What's inside?
Take the Grand Gallery, the massive ascending corridor inside the pyramid. The physical slope of the Grand Gallery is exactly 0.772.
And that means something.
In TDUFT, Dukas identifies this specific ratio as the pi-1 tertiary entropy tier, which is the mathematical boundary that normalizes entropic deviations back to unity.
So it's a physical sloped representation of the harmonic attenuation we talked about earlier, the mechanism that keeps the jazz solo from becoming pure noise.
Exactly, and the chambers themselves map perfectly to the domains of creation we've discussed. The lowest level, the subterranean chamber, represents the infinite potential, the pre-decimal sleep of God where nothing is differentiated.
As you move up.
As you move up, the Queen's chamber represents the zero tail, the void operator, and the pressure up potential. Higher still, the King's chamber represents the one tail, the unity operator, and the harmonic structure.
And what about the very top? The apex of the pyramid, the capstone that is currently missing.
The apex represents pi²-1, the eternal spirit, tail independent, freed from the heavy limestone of the physical structure beneath it.
You know, regardless of whether you believe it was explicitly intentional or just a mathematical inevitability of phi-based architecture, I just marvel at the idea. This massive stone monument is sitting out there in the sand as a giant physical equation.
It really is a marvel.
In this view, it's not a tomb for a pharaoh. It's a receipt. A 4,000-year-old receipt printed in stone, documenting exactly how God's mind woke up, divided, and became matter.
It is a profound perspective on ancient architecture. It suggests that the ancients were not primitive builders trying to stack stones as high as they could. They were advanced geometric mathematicians who perhaps remembered the pre-geometric womb, the fundamental truth of the mathematics better than we do with all our supercomputers.
Which brings us to the ultimate final question of this vast, staggering mathematical machine. We've gone from the void to the decimals to pi to DNA to the pyramids. We have the mechanics. But why?
The ultimate why.
Yeah. What is the point of a universe built this way? Why go through all the trouble of injecting free will into biological codons?
The point, according to the text, is simple: to make choices. Consciousness exists to experience choice, which leads us to the final major concept in the paper: the 2 paths of free will.
Right. We have free will, but what are the options? It essentially boils down to harmony versus entropy.
Yes. Armed with this biological transducer, this DNA antenna, consciousness has a fundamental capacity to align itself with one of the 2 infinite tails we discussed at the very beginning. You can follow the one tail, or you can follow the zero tail. Those are the 2 macro choices of existence.
Let's break down the first choice. Path 1, harmonic alignment. What does that actually look like for a human being living their life?
Path 1 is when you stay in resonance with pi's attenuating patterns. Remember the unity pockets hidden in the infinite tail of pi, the sections that sum perfectly to 1?
Yes, the pure notes and the jazz solo.
When you follow path 1, you are following that underlying structure as it grows quieter and more diffuse in the tail. You do not force things. You participate in natural, spontaneous self-organization. You are trusting the one tail.
Okay, let me relate this to everyday life because I think everyone has felt this at some point. Path 1 is when you feel in the flow. Have you ever had a day or a week where you aren't forcing anything?
Oh, absolutely.
The right words just seem to come to you during a conversation. The right people cross your path exactly when you need them. You make decisions easily and they pan out.
Everything just aligns.
You feel like you are participating in a structure that feels larger than you, but you still have total joyful freedom within it. You are harmonizing with the jazz solo. You are finding the unity pockets.
That is the exact phenomenological experience of path 1. You are experiencing mathematical alignment. But then, of course, there is path 2, entropic drift.
The zero tail. The chaos.
Yes. In path 2, instead of following the faintly attenuating pattern, you grasp at the chaos itself. You treat your departure from structure as your actual freedom.
Interesting.
Instead of flowing, you force movement. You impose your localized will rather than participating in the macro emergence of the whole. And Dukas defines this, in strict mathematical terms, as sin.
Okay, that is a huge redefinition. Sin isn't breaking a moral rule written in a book. It's a mathematical deviation. It is falling out of phase with the harmony.
It is the refusal to follow the pattern that is still present, however faintly, in the attenuation. It is grasping the entropy instead of resting in the harmony. It is trying to write your own melody that clashes with the chord progression.
But this raises a really important, terrifying question. If I choose path 2, if I grasp the chaos, if I force my will and break away from the harmony and just thrash around in the entropic drift, what happens?
It's a natural fear.
Do I break the universe? Do I fall out of the system completely? Am I permanently lost?
That brings us to what is perhaps the most beautiful and comforting assurance in Dukas' entire framework. The text insists that both paths, harmony and entropy, are fully contained within pi. You cannot exit the mind of God.
Wait, even the rebellion is inside the circle?
Precisely. The infinite tail is still pi's tail. Your greatest drift, your most chaotic, forceful, entropic departure from the harmony is still just a mathematical movement within the master equation.
Wow.
The outer boundary of all possible movement is pi itself. Nothing is permanently lost. The circle holds everything. God holds the circle.
That is incredibly profound. When you feel chaotic, when you feel totally unmoored and forced and like your life is just noise, you are caught in the entropic drift. You are living in the zero tail.
Yeah.
But even then, even at your absolute worst, you are fundamentally safe inside the larger circle of reality. Return is always possible because the unity pockets are always there, waiting in the next block of digits. You just have to stop forcing it and listen for the melody again.
The patterns never fully disappear. They just become harder to hear over the noise of your own entropic grasping. The math guarantees your safety, even in your deviation.
What an unbelievable paradigm-shifting journey this paper takes us on. I want to do a quick recap of the massive scale of what we've covered today, because we have traveled further than in any deep dive we've done before.
We started in the transcendent pre-geometric sleep of alpha and omega, where 0 equals 1 and all potential rests in the void. We watched the primordial quaternary binary wake up and divide nothingness against itself to generate the digits 0 through 9, creating the decimal manifold.
We watched pi emerge from that manifold, inheriting the infinite tales of both harmony and chaos. We watched the 5 a.m. insight where pi shattered its perfect symmetry to cast off the 1 to build the physical, geometric frozen universe, leaving the eternal spiritual pi squared minus 1 completely free.
We saw how that eternal spirit reaches back across the veil, injecting its free will into the redundant, degenerate codons of our physical DNA, effectively turning the golden ratio architecture of our brains into biological receivers for the mind of God. A massive cosmic process mirrored perfectly in the ancient stones of the Great Pyramid.
And finally, we saw that armed with that DNA-injected free will, we are left with two choices: harmonize with the one tail of order or drift into the zero tail of chaos. But knowing that either way, the grand equation of pi holds us securely within the circle.
It is a unified architecture that philosophers, theologians, and physicists have gestured toward for millennia, but never quite articulated with this level of mathematical rigor.
So as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final reflection to take with you today, something we haven't touched on yet, but that flows directly out of this math.
I'd love to hear it.
Think about the concept of the physical world being frozen math and the spiritual world being living math. If this framework is true, what actually happens at the exact moment you make a choice. Every time you face a decision, whether it's what to eat for lunch or a major life pivot like moving to a new city, you are standing at the boundary between the infinite and the physical.
The transaction point.
Exactly. When you make that choice, your infinite spirit selects a path, and your DNA locks it into physical action. What if, in that exact moment, a piece of that living, infinite math freezes forever into the physical record of the universe?
That's a huge thought.
Every single choice you make is literally crystallizing a new digit of pi into reality. You aren't just reading the math. By making choices, you are the physical mechanism building the universe from the inside out, one choice, one digit at a time.
The music is playing.
It is. The music is playing, and you are holding the instrument. The only question is, are you going to harmonize with the melody, or are you going to play your own note? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the mathematical nature of the soul. Keep staying curious, keep seeking out the hidden patterns in the world around you, and we'll catch you on the next one.